Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show, and I get to talk to so many great CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of different companies. Go look at my back catalog of past episodes. There's some great episodes back there. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help to connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And before I introduce today's guest, a quick shout out and a thank you to our client, Alexi Cashin. Check out her show, The Alexi Cashin Show. She introduced me to today's guest and absolutely raved about the depth of his knowledge. And when you hear about his educational training and background, you will not be surprised. Mike Provance, PhD, is a serial entrepreneur, author, and speaker on technology, model, innovation, and new venture management. He's the CEO and he leads 3x3, a marketing technology company focused on modernizing the ways brands and liquor retailers engage and sell uniquely to the independent channel consumer. With all the changes that are happening in retail, it's a really interesting area of the market right now. He's a digital technology strategy expert. He's built groundbreaking technology businesses and launched award-winning digital properties over 30 years in financial services, information services, manufacturing, and healthcare industries. He's even worked with the U.S. Navy and U.S. Special Operations Command. Prior to that, he ran early-stage investments in computing and medical technology for the Ben Franklin Partnership. He holds a PhD from George Washington University, where, fun fact, I was born. He also has an MBA from Penn State and a BS in management science from MIT. And Mike, a pleasure to have you here. And tell me, we were chatting a little bit beforehand. You worked for the U.S. Special Operations Command. You worked on some projects that had to do with the Mars missions, and now you're in the wine and spirits industry. How'd you get from there to here?
Great question. And the answer really lies in the fact that most of my career in working with startups and new ventures and new technologies revolves around how do you innovate in regulated environments. So if it's regulated in the sense that it's military, regulated in the sense that it's healthcare, and the beer, wine, and spirits industry is the epitome of a regulated industry that goes back decades.
Absolutely. When I was practicing law, I remember looking into it for a couple clients, and there's the 3-tiered regulations, which is, if you look into the history of it, it seems a little bit baffling probably to today's present day consumer, but it has to do with back when the mob ran alcohol and controlled alcohol distribution.
Yeah, essentially it was ensuring that the mob couldn't own the whole industry, and it gave the federal and state governments ways to put protections in place to make sure the industry stayed above board.
So this is probably a huge question, but what sorts of challenges from a technology marketing standpoint does that antiquated system that we have in place, what sorts of challenges does it create for the companies that you work with?
Well, the biggest challenge is, imagine an industry where you manufacture a product, but you're actually not able to do anything directly with the retailer to incent them to sell your product versus someone else's product in the market. That you have to work with your distributor who pulls in products from a lot of other manufacturers, and the distributor's job is to then get that product on the shelf, and the retailer has to get customers to come in the door and buy product, and the retailers are focused on selling, but they're not necessarily focused on selling your product. So in this industry, brands can't induce retailers to promote their product over another product, right? The retailer has to be able to operate fairly and freely across all the products. Distributors can do things in terms of discounts and coupons, and do create incentives for the retailers. But it really limits the ability of the brand to influence a retailer, to influence a consumer's decision making. Brands can go on run Super Bowl ads to reach consumers and hope to get them to walk in a store and buy the product, which works if you're, a large company like AB InBev or Gallo or someone enormous. But if you're a small manufacturer, being able to drive the right consumers into the stores is a very difficult proposition because the tiers are so locked down.
So there's been this whole huge movement towards direct to consumer for brands, for companies, manufacturers over the last, really 20 years or so. And for wine and spirits, that there are real limits to the extent to which they can do that.
Well, yeah, and the wine industry actually for many years now has had the ability to sell direct to the consumer. That's why you've seen, even dating back several years, the proliferation of wine clubs and the ability to sell and deliver wine to the home. Those were provisions that came through federal law that enabled it to occur. More recently, the Supreme Court has started to level the playing field so that other categories like beer and spirits can start to do the same. But because of the Tied House rules and the way that the laws are structured, every state sets its own rules about what's allowable, which means if you wanted to be a tequila distributor and send products to anyone in the country, you'd have to navigate each state's laws and then try to, basically take the Supreme Court ruling and take that into the state level and try to convince the state to change its rules. So we have a long way to go. But the reality is, even with direct to consumer, retailers are still and will be for the longest time a predominant source of how shoppers find products. So there's direct to consumer is great for some products. It's very hard to discover new products without being able to talk to somebody, and that's where the retailers specialize.
Right. And is technology making it easier for these companies that do want to sell in multiple states to do so in spite of all the different regulations and different standards?
It definitely is. I think, you asked why I got involved. One of the reasons that I got interested in this industry was the technology actually now, with the state of it today, can enable us to navigate a lot of complexity and simplify a lot of complexity that maybe 10 years, 20 years ago wouldn't have been a doable proposition. So technology is absolutely helping it, but it's a long and complex road to get there. So you even now see technology really solving point problems along the supply chain of the industry. There's not an ERP system that can solve the entire supply chain in one whole swoop because of that. Multiple jurisdictions, multiple categories, multiple tiers. When you start doing the matrix algebra on that, it starts to become a very complex math problem to solve.
Right. Now you work with both the manufacturers and also the retailers as well. Retailers as well. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
they're both of our customers.
So there are different challenges that you help them with, or different solutions that you provide for them. Okay.
Different variations on the same solution, which is finding the right shopper, matching them with the right product, and getting them into the store to buy it.
Okay. And take me through
the store, meaning either online or walking in the store. So today it's either one or both.
And take me through some of the ways in which people's buying habits are changing now that we all have a phone in our hand and other digital devices that we're using to, how are people, how is that altering the way that people buy a bottle of wine or buy a bottle of liquor these days?
Well, that's certainly the biggest source of where technology has had an impact. And I think that it's to be expected, right? Shoppers are coming in the stores much more knowledgeable about the brands that they want. Now, that may be more informed by social media or content they see than it is by their own intrinsic desires for it. But alcohol is a social product, right? We shop and we choose our products when we're buying from a liquor store, often because of the social impact, the social status of it, more than this is the one I want to drink. Now,
Right.
we drink for different occasions. So sometimes I buy the bottle I want. Sometimes I buy the bottle that I want to give my friend for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And those are going to be often different. But technology is really helping us sort through that. It's also become a price shopping game, right? So people will come in and they'll have their phone in their hand and they'll have what they can get it for somewhere down the street, but they're at that store. And so this is where, especially for the small liquor retailers, the ability to engage that shopper and hand sell them becomes a benefit, because you can move them to something they might find more interesting.
Yeah.
And that's really how retailers are starting to change up their games, which is they're realizing we can't just stand behind the checkout and ring people out when they finish. We have to engage in that discovery, helping them think about it.
So what are some ways that these smaller retailers can even compete with the larger big box retailers? How is technology kind of helping to level the playing field for them?
Well, even before technology gets involved, some of the things that make a local or a small retailer different, when you think about a big box store, whether it's a Walmart, a Kroger, any large grocery store, they will typically carry fewer SKUs, and they're only going to carry SKUs that turn over quickly, so they can move high velocity inventory through the stores. They're getting better today at bringing more interesting brands in as well, but still their buying habits, their buying patterns for choosing product to put on the shelves tend to be driven at a corporate level by what they can move, get the best deals on in aggregate. Where if I'm a small, liquor retailer, I'm going to carry many more SKUs. And if I'm thoughtful about how I do that, it gives me a place to develop some expertise. High-end whiskeys, high-end Japanese whiskey, maybe it's, craft beers from around the world. Whatever that specialty is one way that I can compete, simply because I can buy in smaller volume and attract the right set of customers. Where technology comes in is making that process efficient, right? Knowing which products are likely to sell well, which ones aren't, knowing which shoppers are likely to be the right shoppers to try to bring into my store. That kind of technology is the kind of technology that Amazon and Kroger and Total Wine and Walmart have had for years. Those technologies are just starting to become available to retailers today.
So is this like, digital advertising or Facebook advertising, Google advertising, that sort of thing, from the local retailer, designed to get the shopper back into the store?
Those are the channels to reach the shopper on their mobile phone, right? I mean, you reach them on their mobile phone in different ways at different times. If I'm running errands, programmatic ads are going to have more impact because I've got my Maps app open, or I've got music app open, or something else. But if I'm home and scrolling through Instagram, obviously social is the place to get my attention. So those channels and optimizing across those channels is an important piece. But what's the most important is being able to cut that audience down to just the people likely to shop. So much money is used inefficiently in digital advertising by many companies because they don't have a starting point of knowing who's likely to buy the product I'm trying to advertise. And that's really the part that we focus on, is working with retailers and brands to understand, for your product in these markets, this is that audience that you need to reach. And we can now program that into the right channel with the right content to reach you as the shopper with the right call to action.
Okay, so dumb question. How do you figure that out? How do you figure out who that person is, who's going to buy?
Yeah, so
the buyer who's going to buy.
We started from a position which really nobody had captured this information before in a systematic way, but we went and built a network of almost 2,000 retailers across the country, local independent retailers, mostly ones who tended to be more progressive, wanted to grow their business, wanted to bring in new ideas. And worked with them, collected their point of sale data, which gave us basically a view of all the receipts of how people shop. And from that basket level data, that receipt level data, we're able to build models of different shopping behaviors. And those models become the way we identify which audience to target, and then build with the brand or the retailer the content to reach that particular audience.
I have a question. How do you that doesn't seem like an easy task to get 2,000 to 3,000 retailers nationwide to buy into this vision of this idea that was coming to fruition? How did you sell these companies, many of which I'm sure have limited budgetary constraints, just like any company does, but especially smaller companies? How did you sell them on that idea?
Well, first of all, it was understanding that they do live inside this ecosystem of brands and retailers. And so, companies like Nielsen and IRI have for years been compiling data on, big box stores and in this industry and all of consumer packaged goods. But this independent side, imagine those 2,000 stores, very different point of sale systems, very different attitudes of the retailers. But what it all came down to is they felt a level of fear about the unknown nature of the future. Seeing what Amazon has done with other industries, with the bookstores originally, seeing what the impact of a big box store dropping into the neighborhood has on them. They've all experienced that loss of customer. Even seeing changes in regulatory conditions that cause them to lose shoppers. For example, when several states like Colorado and Kansas changed laws about what the kind of beer that grocery stores could carry. Once they could carry full strength beer, people stopped going to the local liquor store to get beer, and beer was the thing that brought them in, and then they picked up all the other products. So there are a lot of things that have been changing in the last 5 to 10 years for these small retailers. And fear is a big motivator to innovate and to change.
Yeah.
And that was really the thing that drove it.
What gives these small retailers hope to compete against this overwhelming wave of, it seems like in many different industries, the larger companies have been winning out and smaller retailers across the country in different industries have struggled?
It's the same that you see in any industry. I think, this is where my academic comes out in me. But when you think about adoption of innovation, there truly is kind of a life cycle to that. And you've got that 13% that are the early adopters, the ones who are willing to take the risks. And once they show it can be done, you start to see others picking it up. So as we went to market, our focus was on not all retailers, but who are the 13% who know they need to change, who have the mindset for change, and who are willing to do some experiments, see what works. And that, frankly, in any industry is how you cause change to occur. You have to break it down to bite-sized, chunks, and then focus on a bite at a time.
Right. And we were talking beforehand about a sweepstakes project that you've been working on. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is something we're just hopefully by the time this airs, we'll have started to launch tests of this. But the notion really was less about the sweepstakes. That was more of the way to get into the market. But what we're interested in doing is we've taken our ability to look at sales data and turn that into shopper preferences that really get to the psychology of the shopper's buying decision. And so we are testing our models for doing that by surveying consumers and kind of getting firsthand from the shoppers, how do they think about buying alcohol, and how do we map our systems, our machine learning and AI based systems against that.
Any final thoughts for those listening to this on these topics before I wrap up with my favorite two questions? But any final thoughts on the changes that are afoot in the industry and how it's a really interesting idea of smaller companies banding together to fight off the the larger retailers that seem to be taking over?
The final thoughts I guess I would have is that there's no better time to start than now. If you're a retailer thinking about what you can do to help your business survive and grow, you just got to start fighting a little bit at a time. And there's plenty of different technology providers out there who are now really focused intently on this side of the market. And start with some of them. Start talking about how they can change the way you do business. It's certainly how we think about going into the market with independent retailers and independent or in the brands who sell into them.
Last two questions. So I'm a big fan of gratitude. So if you look at your peers or other contemporaries that are doing work today, who do you respect? Who do you admire?
There's several people out there and many people out there who are doing some great things. I certainly like to see the work that is going into working with the retailers holistically and the brands holistically. There's a company called Innovating that's doing some great work with wine and now spirits around e-commerce. And as e-commerce becomes a bigger deal, I'm excited to see what 750 is doing. I was talking earlier with its CEO, and they've taken a different approach to the market and in solving some of the same kinds of problems that we were talking about here. And I think they've got some great new ideas coming down the pipe. But I think in the industry, the technology vendors, the technology providers are really trying to solve difficult problems. I really think that you've got to look more broadly within this industry at other the rest of consumer product goods. One of our sister companies, a company called Fetch Rewards, has been doing some great innovative work that spans all categories, including beer, wine, and spirits. And they've been able to make a big impact on the loyalty side of things and really reshape that part of the industry. So
I'm curious if working in this industry, they say the rewards go, or what's the saying? The spoils go to the victor or something like that. Yeah. I think what that means to me is, if you take on bigger challenges, you get bigger rewards for it. But you're in this heavily regulated industry with emerging technology that takes a while to break through. There are ever times when you think to yourself, geez, why am I taking on this? Is too much.
I don't think I ever look at it that way, because I've spent most of my career around one regulated industry or another. There are times where I wonder, how big of an impact do we have to make to really help the retailers and the brands in this space be successful? I mean, if there's 60,000 retailers, independent retailers, just on the liquor store side, not counting restaurants and bars where that's, orders of magnitude bigger, how do you get big enough to make a meaningful impact for that whole corner of the market? And so there are times where I look at that and go, well, that's an enormous challenge. But, frankly, that's what I love about what I do, whether it's this industry or prior ones. It's, I like to solve hard problems, and that doesn't always mean creating a unicorn. A lot of times you solve hard problems only to find there's more hard problems behind it. So
right.
It's a challenging industry that way, but that's what makes it fun.
Yeah. Final question. So let's pretend we're at an awards banquet, much like the Oscars or the Emmys. You're receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award for everything you've done up until this point. And what we all want to know is, who do you thank? In addition to family, friends, who are the mentors, who are the colleagues, who are the friends, who are the peers, business partners, teachers, professors, who are the people you would acknowledge in your remarks?
Yeah, again, a long list, but if I pulled a few names just to highlight a few, I spent, 10, 12 years of my life wrestling. A whole lot of wrestlers better than me, but I did pretty well. And my coach, John Brody, was a huge advocate of mine and really supportive. And the thing that he showed me through being that advocate wasn't about wrestling. It was about determination, about persistence through pain, about focusing on outcomes, all things that I still use today. And yet I don't have to wrestle anyone today. The reason I got a PhD in the middle of my career mostly had to do with my, interest in understanding how entrepreneurship affects society. But those were really stoked early on during my MBA by Rocky DeWitt, who at the time was at Penn State, now at University of Vermont. And just the way she taught and thought about strategy was fascinating for me. And then, and during that PhD, my dissertation, Jerry Elias Carianis, has a global view of entrepreneurship and innovation, and he kind of helped seed my own thinking about that. So I think about all those, and then, of course, I've got, along the way, many investors and partners in the growth of these companies that have helped as well. But those I would call the seeds of inspiration from way back.
Mike, 3x3 is the name of the company. Where can people go to learn more about what you do or connect with you?
You bet. It's 3x3.us, and it's really spelled 3x3.us. And I'm simply Mike at 3x3.us. So have everyone reach out. Thanks.
Great. Mike, thanks so much for your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.